This is question 1, the 50-mark question from the December 2022 AFM exam, and we're going to do a short overview of it, just focusing on how to approach this type of question, but we're not going to do a technical work through here. With the 50-mark question, you are absolutely going to have to immerse yourself in the scenario. The scenarios always really matter. But before you do, it's sensible to look at the requirements and to pick up at least the first couple on your first read through. So here we know that we're going to have to explain the risk that we face from falling sales revenue in Italy and how that could be managed. And then we're going to have to do some currency hedging, it looks like, using a forward rate and an over-the-counter option. And that gives me enough on my mind just to think, okay, this is currency hedging and risk. I set those up in my answer plan with those headings, and I'd start to read. And the first thing I'd be thinking about is this part A, 6 marks, falling sales revenue. Okay, so here is the first requirement. Let's just bring it up a bit and expand it. And what we're told here is the general nature of the business, which I've highlighted in yellow. So we are involved in food manufacture, we're expanding rapidly, and we've got revenues in lots of currencies. And then I can focus mainly on the final paragraph, which is talking about the Italian market, which has been penetrated by competitors from France and Germany because we think the euro is weak compared to the dollar, so the dollar's strong. So that's going to make it harder for an American company to export to that market over time because the dollar's strong, and that puts pressure on your sales prices. It makes you uncompetitive. Now, what a lot of people did was to rush into that question and to say, well, we could manage that with forwards or futures or options. But that actually isn't relevant because this final paragraph says that the FD says many risks can be managed through derivatives, but some risks are harder. So what you have to think about here is what makes this risk hard to manage with derivatives. And this involves applying your knowledge. And the key point here is that this is not a short-term issue. And derivatives can really only manage your exchange rate risk if it's a short-term issue. What's going on here is that over time, the euro has weakened. So applying my knowledge, this is economic risk. Economic risk is a long-term exchange rate fluctuation that has an impact on shareholder wealth. And it tends to be driven by long-term macroeconomic factors. And that seems to be what's happening here. Until I really understand the scenario and spend time understanding the scenario, I won't be able to spot that. If my answer focuses on economic risk and how to manage economic risk, I'll get very good credit for anything that I suggest. If it simply talks about short-term exchange rate risk and derivatives, it won't get credit because that's not what the scenario is asking for. And that's why the planning time is so important. We recommend that at least 20% of the time available is needed to plan, and it's needed to plan to make sure that you don't go off at a tangent and that you answer the question that's set. Let's have a look at part B now. Okay, so in part B, we've got some communication marks available for preparing a report, but we'd keep the format very simple. There'll be a short introduction, short conclusion. We'll have subheadings for each of the report sections, and we'll reference to the workings which will be done in the spreadsheet. So in my report, I'd have a brief reference to the workings in the spreadsheet, and the workings would tackle the amounts receivable in 4 months' time. So this is Exhibit 2. Let's just have a quick look at this. And again, we're not going to actually work the numbers, but this specific Scenario, it's worth 7 marks. We have to calculate the dollar receipts if we use a forward rate. Okay, so we're expecting some money in 4 months' time, and we're going to use a forward rate, but we have to calculate it. And we calculate it using interest rates. There's a formula given on the formula sheet to do this. All you have to be aware of is that the interest rates are given in annual terms. So for them to be used to calculate a forward rate, you need to multiply them by 4/12. And then we've got an option, and what we have to do here is figure out whether we want a call option, which is an option to buy dollars, or a put option, which is an option to sell dollars. And if we've got money coming in a foreign currency, we're going to want to buy dollars. So we're going to do all our calculation on the basis of a dollar call option. We've got a premium to pay, and we can work the numbers through on that basis. And then briefly in the report, we could say which one we're going to choose based on which one gives a better outcome. The next 9 marks are about calculating the outcome of using futures contracts to hedge interest rate fluctuations of 0.5%. We're told very specifically to express our final answer in dollars and to include the number of futures contracts needed. So we'll make sure that we do that. This is picking up on the short-term investment. So the idea here is you're going to receive some money, and in B part 1 we've said how much money is going to be received. We're now going to be investing that money, which we'll receive in 4 months' time, for a further 5 months. So we've got 5 months of interest rate risk. We're given some details of a June futures contract, which is fine because we need cover to the 1st of May. And we have to use this to do a relatively straightforward interest rate hedging calculation for a reasonable number of marks. Okay, so we're told the futures contracts are 500,000. We're going to need contracts to buy. Okay, we're not going to do a full calculation here, but these will be contracts to buy. From B part 1, if you've done the numbers correctly, you'll see that you'll receive 4.2 million. There's no penalty if you're using the wrong receipt from B part 1. That's the outcome of using the futures contract. So we're going to need to divide that by 500,000, and that looks like it's going to be 8.4. But we need 5 months of cover, and each contract only gives me 3. So the final outcome is going to be 14 contracts to buy. Once I've worked out how I'm going to set up the futures agreement, I'm then going to work it through. Now, I'm not going to do the calculation here. It's a standard calculation. It was done badly in the exam. And perhaps because people are not spending enough time revising interest rate futures. And here we have relatively easy 9 marks on this area. And that's just for calculations. So then going back to the requirements, we're going to have a heading in the report for commenting on the 2 sets of numbers that we've done. Comments are generally fairly brief. We also have to make sure we address the queries raised by the board of directors. So let's just see what they were. And also the margin requirements. So what have the board of directors had to say about alternative methods and the margin requirements? And it's very easy to think, okay, I'll go back into this lengthy exhibit 1 and pick out the points. Here's some stuff about the board of directors. I'll talk about this. But actually none of that has got anything to do with alternative methods of hedging or margin requirements. And so I've got to be careful to make sure that I'm answering the right question. And this is what AFM is largely about. It's good exam technique allied with a fair technical understanding. It doesn't have to be brilliant technical understanding. But I am going to answer the right question. Nothing there is going to help me do that. So where is the information? I have to look around. The second exhibit. Right, what about this at the end? The board of directors want to know how the currency exposure can be managed using the two instruments above, so there'll be a short amount of that to say, and whether it's possible to hedge using alternative methods and not derivative instruments. So I don't think there's any point saying we could use currency futures or exchange traded currency options because these are derivative instruments. So what else is there? And that's the test. What else can we think about? Well, we could potentially say we could give our customers discounts to pay earlier. The idea of encouraging leading the payment. So that would be one approach. Alternatively, I could use money market hedging. That would be another non-derivative approach. So once I'm talking about the right thing, it's easy. We just have to explain these techniques. There was also something about margin requirements. Well, I haven't dealt with that yet. A margin is a deposit. It's not in itself an expense. So we can explain that to the board. So we explain what margins are. And in fact, futures aren't more expensive because of it, although if you're tying money up as a deposit, it does create potentially an overdraft issue. So you might have some overdraft interest to factor into it. But there are other forms of hedging that are more expensive than futures. That margin is not generating much expense. So that's all exam technique. There's not much technical knowledge there at all. And the final requirement, well, this is a commonly tested area. Why do we bother managing financial risk? Is it beneficial? And this is an area that you will study when you start to look at risk management. And there's a fairly textbook response here. And as part of that, should you talk about risk management to your stakeholders? And the answer is almost certainly yes, and you can explain what the benefits are. And as you do this, you've got the opportunity to score marks for skepticism. You don't have to agree that the company should be managing its financial risk. You can certainly question the benefit of it. And maybe there are some issues in risk management that are not going to make it easy for you to explain your approach to your stakeholders. So there's no right or wrong here, but there's certainly an opportunity to start to think about the scenario and to pick up some of these professional marks. One of which is communication, and we're going to make sure that we end the report with a brief conclusion. So a quick overview of this question. It's not about getting the numbers right, and AFM very rarely is. Yes, there are numbers in B part 2 and B part 1 that you would like to get right. Probably you'll make some small mistakes in there. That's absolutely fine. To pass AFM, you need to answer the question that is set, you need to address your points to the scenario, and you need to manage your time properly as well. And that completes this brief overview.